What began as a grassroots effort in 2001 is now a year-round institution and a crown jewel in the St. Louis arts community. Shakespeare Festival St. Louis. And after a nationwide search, new leadership is at the helm. Tom Ridgely has been named executive producer. Go in depth during this one-on-one interview.
It's this thing that we do where we hope to be able to really connect with and fully put ourselves in the shoes of another human being.
Sweet Juliet.
And get a rare behind-the-scenes look at Shakespeare Glen in Forest Park.
Yeah, please, let's go. So we're going into the Capulet House.
Join us for a conversation with Tom Ridgely.
Who is Tom Ridgely?
Still finding out. Right now I'm the executive producer of Shakespeare Festival St. Louis. I came most directly from New York, where I was for 16 years, where I ran a company that I founded with a friend of mine, an actor named Arian Moyed. The company was called Waterwell, and it was, it still is, dedicated to developing new work. So often it was adaptations of classics, but original pieces too. And some Shakespeare there at the end. But really it was a new play development company that over time also got really into arts education. So by the time I left, we had a really big arts ed program that partnered with New York City public schools mainly to deliver theater training, arts classes, drama to middle and high school students.
Now, personally, you're married?
I'm married, happily. My wife, Jennifer, is down in South America right now. She's in Chile on a Fulbright. She's getting her PhD and doing research on her dissertation, so she has been unable to join me in St. Louis yet, but she'll be out in the fall.
What attracted you to the St. Louis job?
Well, the festival and the city. As you might have been able to gather from how I described Waterwell, there's a lot about what the festival does in terms of its really high quality professional productions, its community engagement programs on the streets, and also its educational tours and classes and programs in the schools branch of the programming that are really line up with my values and the things that I care about and the things that I think a theater ought to be doing. And so it just felt like a really good fit personally. And then I was really attracted to the way the festival has become a really beloved tradition for the city of St. Louis, and that it's really woven its way into the cultural fabric of the city. And the opportunity to try with an arts organization to serve an entire city is really, really appealing to me. New York's obviously an amazing town, and there's so much to do and see, but even the public theater, which is sort of the big theater in the city, is maybe the only one that can lay claim to serving the entire city of New York. Everything else is pretty specialized. But I think with the festival, there's a real opportunity to do that here in St. Louis.
You're the executive producer, which combines both the artistic and the business functions. Is that going to be a tough role?
It's a large portfolio, as they say. But it's similar to the position that I had at Waterwell, where I was responsible for both of those things too. So it's there are realms with which I'm comfortable. But it's always a challenge to be able to balance the sort of the artistic vision you might have with the more sort of managerial realities that you're faced with.
How do you resolve a business versus artistic?
I think you have a certain standard that you want for the work, and so you try to make sure that standard gets met. And so it's really, at the end of the day, you're trying to do what's best to support what happens in the program, whether it be on stage or in a classroom, or wherever that is. But sometimes you just have to say, not this time. Sometimes you say, like, well, that's good to know that we didn't quite have the resources in place for that this time. So we'll have to figure out how to solve that the next time around.
Do you have a wish list of sorts of, we could really use this or really use that to reach the top tier?
Well, it's interesting you asked that. I mean, this is day 6, I think, for me, or on the job. But it also happens to be day 6 for the Romeo and Juliet company out in the park. So they started tech for that show right when I was starting, and so I'm getting to see a lot about what it is to do a show in that space. And there's beautiful things that are going on there, and there's also real challenges and real obstacles in terms of the facility and how the actors are sort of housed within it. And what the technical capabilities are, and it's sort of accessibility issues. Obviously it's a beautiful open space, but that can be difficult to navigate for a lot of people. So it's sort of how can we create a space that is sets artists up to succeed, and that can really allow for the best that the field can offer.
Now, you've done outdoor theater before?
I have been involved. I assistant directed Daniel Sullivan on a Shakespeare in the Park production in New York, in Central Park there, of As You Like It. So I got to see that process really up close and personally. And I've also spent a fair amount of time at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival out in Ashland and at the Old Globe out in San Diego. And those are probably the two other big, large, outdoor Shakespearean festivals in the country. And so, yeah, and all three of those things have things that that St. Louis doesn't quite have yet in terms of what they can pull off artistically.
What sort of things will those be?
Well, they have theaters that have been around for 60, 80 years. They're well set up to do that at the very highest level. There's just a lot more that's been invested in those facilities. And with that history, they're able to attract, really, the absolute best artists in the country. And that's why they have deservedly have the reputations that they do.
Is that a potential here, an achievable goal, or is it not feasible with the Glen being the Glen? Obviously
there are challenges. The Forest Park is a beautiful place and needs to be preserved. Anything that you do there has to be really carefully thought through. Obviously the city and Forest Park Forever and a lot of different constituencies are involved in deciding, this is the best use of this space. I'm very biased. Of course, I happen to think that would be the absolute best use for that space. But I understand that we're not the only sort of people involved in that decision.
Let's go back to you personally. Mm-hmm. What would you like St. Louisans to know about you?
Well, I'm from Indianapolis, so although I'm coming most recently from New York, I'm a Midwestern boy. I was born and raised there. I went to Indiana for college. And so, in a lot of ways, to me, this feels like coming home. There's a familiarity, I think, to the region. Obviously, St. Louis is a very different city than Indianapolis is, but there is, there is a certain warmth and a kindness and a sense of civic responsibility that I think exists here that I recognize and that feels close. And so that makes me really excited. So as I'm sort of arriving now, I'm just finding myself really loving the city, the neighborhoods, the different arts organizations, the food, the culture, the sports. It just feels like life on a very human scale. It has everything, but in a way that's sort of within reach. And so I'm looking personally forward to just sort of getting to go out and reach that, but also figuring out again how the festival can sort of be a part of that in bigger and bigger ways.
Making arts accessible to people.
Yeah, well, and there's such a great history of that here with the art museum and the zoo, these big cultural organizations that are saying, this is for everyone. The most beautiful paintings and sculptures that human beings have produced should be available for anyone to come and see for free in an absolutely beautiful, historic building. The most beautiful and diverse species on the planet should be there, and well cared for, and for people to learn about and enjoy. So I feel that way about the plays of Shakespeare. I happen to think that his plays are among the greatest cultural resources and treasures that we have, and that he belongs right there with the rest of them.
What's your favorite play and why?
You get to ask that question a lot, and this isn't a cop-out answer. This is the truth of my emotional experience, in that it tends to be the one that you're working on, or the one that you've most recently finished. And I say that because every time you really get to know one of his plays, you can read it, and obviously that's a beautiful way to experience the plays, but actually engaging with it in a production and a rehearsal process, working with actors and designers and sort of realizing it, you get to know it in a very different way. Once you do get to know that play, you can't help, at least I can't help, but be awed by the capacity of that man, and by extension of human beings in general, to see and understand and experience and be curious about the world. So to get more specific, the last one I did was Love's Labour's Lost, which isn't his most beloved play. But I think, wrongly neglected, because I did a production, with high school students, with sophomores at a New York City public school. It was one of the last things I did for Waterwell, and it was a really, really beautiful experience. And it showed me that it's a really funny, heartbreaking, and beautiful play.
But just ignored for what reason?
I have two suspicions. One, the language is on the page is very challenging. Shakespeare was writing almost entirely in rhymed verse then, because actually Romeo and Juliet is also very rhymed. It's interesting when you come and see it, and Midsummer is too. And so, and they think that and Richard II were all sort of written around the same time because they have a high percentage of rhymed couplets. But that can be tough to read. I mean, as you're reading it, it can feel a little sing-songy in your head. And also, he wrote these very erudite characters, so there's a lot of classical allusions and things, references to which we don't quite have the same access to as people did 400 years ago.
So, it's a little too topical for us today, huh?
A little bit, yeah. He's sort of satirizing a kind of an intellectual elitism that was specific to the time, and it was really steeped in the classics. So there's a lot of, I think, references to things that we just aren't as familiar with. But I think with really great acting and with some judicious trims, what you've got is a really beautiful story about people coming of age. But I think really, and why I think it's a really important play for right now, is that it's really a play about young men coming to terms with how they engage with young women, and how their ideas and sort of what their culture has maybe taught them to engage with women is confronted with a very different reality. And I think they learn a lot over the course of actually getting to have that experience of love.
Do you foresee the opportunity to stage it here?
I think that could be great. One of the amazing things about it is it's all set in the park of the King of Navarre, which is one of these great sort of royal parks like Versailles, you can imagine, right? Yeah. So it does seem, and it all happens in this one location. It's unique in Shakespeare's canon in that it all takes place in this one single place, at the park of the King of Navarre. So it does seem to be crying out to be done in a really beautiful...
Got a really good set there.
Yeah, you've got the environment there really helps that play in a way that, doesn't for maybe, say, Hamlet.
Talk about you and the arts. What music would I find on your most favorite music player right now?
Well, that's a funny question. I have this thing I'm doing this thing with two friends of mine where each month we're taking turns picking a different sort of artist or genre that we then sort of have to explore. And so this month it started off with a playlist of, I think, about a dozen different country albums from different eras, and that's not a genre that I was really familiar with before. But getting into, Hank Williams and Buck Owens and Tammy Wynette, who else? Anyways, George Jones, is that him?
George Jones, yeah.
George Jones. What a voice that guy has.
He kept her picture on his wall.
And he does this amazing thing that Shakespeare does too, I think, or that great actors do, is that when he is singing, he's so emotionally connected to what the song is about in a really incredible way. But it's a great way to just sort of, listen to things that you wouldn't normally get to listen to and to really dive deeply into them. So,
what sort of books?
Well, right now I'm rereading the biography of Joe Papp, who founded the New York Shakespeare Festival. It was given to me by Oscar Eustis, who currently runs the New York Shakespeare Festival. Years ago, when I first got to New York, I got to intern in his office, and that was sort of his kind of thank you gift to me. And I read it at the time and found it really beautiful and really formative in a way. The way he talks about theater's role in a community and in the life of a city definitely shaped me in a lot of ways. And so it's been fun to go back and relive that, with a slightly different perspective. I think at the time I was really sort of smitten with the beauty of his vision. And now it's interesting because I can see sort of some of the frailties of him as a man. Some of his sort of his excesses, weaknesses. So that's interesting. It's nice to sort of like take him down off a pedestal a little bit and see him as as another human being.
What is the importance of theater or arts in general to a community?
Those experiences are what sustain us and enrich us and give us joy. I think we all feel that way, that music and art and movies and literature and theater elevate us in a way that's hard to find in our daily lives sometimes. But the biggest thing about theater in particular is that it's really, I think, the only place where human beings go to practice caring about other human beings. If you think about what happens when you sit down and watch a show, you're sitting down and boy, really hoping against hope that you're going to care deeply about what you watch for the next 2 hours. The hope is that it'll be so well done, that you'll be so drawn into the story and the characters that you'll be laughing when they're laughing, crying when they're crying, and going along the whole journey with them. But obviously these characters don't, although the actors are very real, don't actually exist. They're figments of our imagination, so that's why it feels like practice. It's this thing that we do where we hope to be able to really connect with and fully put ourselves in the shoes of another human being. And I don't think that there is anything more important about being alive than being able to do that and to do it well. Because if you look around at the world and our country, all of the pain and the strife and the discord comes from how hard it is for us to do that over and over and over again with all the people that we come into contact with. Or even sometimes more importantly, the people that we don't come in contact with, the people that we don't look in the eye because we just aren't in proximity with them. So if we can practice that in the theater and we can get better at doing that in the streets and in the stores and in our daily lives, then I think, then we can start to, heal the world and make it a better place.
Reestablish human connections.
Yeah, and thick connections too. There's all this connection and connectivity now too, but it's very thin and it's very digital and it's very transactional. But that's a very different kind of connection and connectivity that happens when you're sitting in the park and there's music happening over there and you're running into someone over here and you're all sitting down together in this big group experiencing one thing at the same time, breathing in and out together, like feeling your hearts beat in time. That's a much thicker connectivity, and I think what we need.
You form an instant community there.
That's really what theaters are in the business of doing, if you want to put it that way.
An intentional community.
Yeah, that's right. It's creating space for people to come together and have an experience. Hopefully one that lingers, one that is absolutely predicated on the fact that it is something that's shared. It's not a private individual thing. It is about the other people that you're there with in that moment. Ultimately, the other thing we look for when we go to see a play is a surprise. We want something to surprise us and delight us. And sometimes that's a beautiful moment that's been crafted very carefully by actors and directors over weeks and months, and sometimes it's a sea lion from behind you at the zoo. But it's an authentic moment, whatever it is.
And it's a unique moment. That play will never be that way exactly again.
Yeah, and people tell those stories. That becomes sort of that gets woven into people's personal narratives, right? That time they were there when that happened.
Would you elaborate a little bit more on the educational component?
There are two main branches of programming other than what goes on in the park. One is in the streets and one is in the schools. In the schools is a large educational tour where actually two sort of stripped down Shakespearean plays or adaptations of Shakespearean plays travel around to different schools. And so I think for a lot of people, that's sort of their first exposure to Shakespeare and to theater and to that kind of art form. There's also 2 summer camps that run every summer that teach young people how to engage with Shakespearean text and his plays. And there's also a year-round Shakespeare squadron, specifically for high schoolers. that does similar things. And the big one is this In the Streets program, where artists, typically a playwright, will spend a year, maybe more, sort of embedding themselves in a neighborhood in St. Louis, in a community, and talking to the residents, getting to know their, their hopes and dreams, their fears and concerns, and with them, collaborating to adapt a Shakespeare play and perform it with a mixture of neighborhood residents and professional actors. And that happens in the streets, in the neighborhood that's been partnered with. And so that's a much deeper engagement even than just coming to see a play in Forest Park, because there's so much time and investment in those communities. And it's great because it says, hey, look, there are these amazing stories and artists and people here in St. Louis. Let's put that front and center.
That's a pretty comprehensive educational agenda. How would you grow something like that?
I would love to see a tour of a Shakespeare play that wasn't necessarily geared for young people, but that was going out, as I said, to the parts of St. Louis that maybe aren't necessarily coming to Forest Park because they're not as familiar with it, or not as comfortable with it, or not as enticed by it, and taking that around either to different parks all over St. Louis, or to different other kind of community centers, places where people don't have access, and places where maybe people could really stand to, have that kind of culture as part of their lives. There's a big history of Shakespeare going into prisons and homeless centers and sort of veterans hospitals and things like that, because there's so much evidence that these plays can offer so much, to people who really feel sort of cut off from the rest of us in some way.
So that would be part of your wish list?
That would be high up on my wish list. It would be. It would be.
I know you're very early on in this gig, but do you have goals, dreams, visions for the festival?
As I mentioned earlier, I'm really curious about how the festival can do a better and better job of serving the whole city of St. Louis. The sort of questions I'm asking myself, and then I'm asking people as I'm getting to meet them, is, who are we not reaching? Who's not coming? Who are we not going to? And how can we find a way to reach those people? And how can we reach them with the highest quality programming possible? The festival's grown really quickly and established a real reputation for itself. But there's a lot of desire, I think, to see it continue to grow and to continue to improve and to really step into the very top tier of Shakespearean festivals in the country. And it's something, obviously, that I would love to see happen as well.
Very cool. We're going to walk through the Glen. We're going to look at the costuming shop. Now, you said backstage was very interesting for the actors. Could we step back there?
Yeah, please. Yeah, let's go.
You lead the way.
So we're going into the Capulet House.
Oh.
Not as grand as the exterior, but you see sort of how the actors start to navigate. So all of this mulch has to be laid down because there's cables running everywhere for the lights, both on stage and some of these backstage run lights. And now here's where it gets tricky. In a normal theater, you'd have dressing rooms and a green room and a place for people to relax, and there would be running water and all of that. But here we've got these sort of these portable trailers. So in there is where the sound equipment is kept, and actually these are the dressing rooms right here. This is all rented. The stage there has to get rebuilt every year. The lighting towers have to get re-erected. So it's a whole process just to get things sort of ready for. And we haven't even gotten to the specific set yet.
When you're putting together a set like this, what goes into the planning process?
Well, it starts with a conversation usually with a director and a designer. So talking about the world of the play and what they wanted it to feel like and how their Romeo and Juliet was going to be different from other ones. And as you can see, they landed on a really vibrant, contemporary, colorful world for this play. As I understand it, this set is a more sort of intricate one than typically is built here in the park. You can see there's lots of different angles, lots of different levels, lots of things to climb on, these stairs. So it's a real kind of a fun playground, I think, for the actors. Yeah, I mean, this is beautiful, and and to see it, I think it has this really nice relationship to the park with some of these natural colors, and there's leafy greens in the set, and it sort of connects out with all of the grass and trees that we're surrounded by here. Actually, it's nice because you aren't constrained by architecture, so your imagination can really kind of run wild.
Yeah, you've got a pretty good fly if
Yeah.
you have to build something up, right?
Exactly. You got width and height. You've got a lot of space to play with. The moon rises and she emerges. She sort of steps into frame, and Romeo sees her, and that's what light through yonder window breaks.
Got it.
And then she comes out onto the balcony, and she delivers her, "O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo?"
The line we all know.
The one we know of. That and to be or not to be.
But the actors can really feel the audience from here too.
Absolutely, and there's a charge that you feel, and it's directly proportional to the number of bodies that are in that space. It's you can imagine, Steph Curry hitting a three-pointer at the buzzer. This is sort of the actor equivalent of that.
You feel the energy.
Yeah, it's a loving loop. I think they love what they're doing. They feel the audience is loving getting it, and that's what creates the community. And what a beautiful, beautiful thing.
Thank you for the behind the scenes. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah, thank you. This has been great.
This is a cultural treasure.
Thank you. Thank you.